I'm Nathan, 40 years old, and I work in marketing. I've always tried to keep things straightforward with my family, but lately that's been harder than I thought. What started as a simple family milestone turned into one of the most painful experiences of my life. My dad, Richard, has been an engineer for over 3 decades. He's the kind of man who values tradition and hard work. For years, he was the rock of the family, at least in the eyes of most people. My older brother Andrew, who's 45, always seemed to be Dad's favorite, and honestly, it's no secret. Andrew had this way of charming everyone, the golden son, everyone expected to succeed. Me? I was always the troublemaker or the ungrateful one, labels that stuck even when I tried to prove otherwise. When Dad announced his retirement, I thought maybe things would change. This was his big moment. I imagined a party, speeches, family photos, everyone there, including me. I was looking forward to celebrating with him, to finally feeling like I mattered. But as the date approached, something felt off. I hadn't received any word about the retirement dinner. No calls, no texts, no invitations. I reached out to Mom a few times, trying to be casual about it, but she always seemed busy or dismissive. Then, a week before the event, I ran into my Aunt Lena at the supermarket. I asked her about the party, trying to keep my tone light. "Oh, Nathan, you didn't get the invite? They sent it last month. Andrew RSVP'd ages ago," she said, her eyes flicking away quickly. My stomach dropped. I confronted Andrew that evening. "Hey, did Dad's retirement dinner invite come to me? I haven't heard anything," I asked. His reply came cold and blunt. "You weren't invited. Dad and Mom agreed it was better this way. You've always been the ungrateful one. They didn't want you ruining his big night." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Ungrateful? Ruining the night? That wasn't me. I'd always been respectful, though admittedly critical when it came to how Dad treated us differently. But excluding me completely? That was something else. I took a deep breath before responding. "If I'm so ungrateful, then I guess you won't mind missing my promotion celebration next week. Everyone else is invited." He didn't reply after that. The night of the retirement dinner, I heard through family group messages how beautiful the event was. The speeches, the laughter, the toasts. Pictures showed Dad beaming with pride, surrounded by family. Except me. I stayed home that night, nursing the sting of rejection. 2 weeks later, my promotion celebration was a success. Colleagues and friends congratulated me. I felt genuinely proud. Then, a message from my cousin Sarah shook everything up. She sent a photo of an unopened invitation addressed to me, with Andrew's handwriting on the envelope, alongside a note inside that read, "Do not deliver." I sat there, stunned. They had deliberately kept me in the dark, hidden the invitation from me. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. A text from Dad. "Nathan, I'm so sorry. I didn't know it had gotten this far. Can we talk?" I stared at the message, knowing this was far from over. After reading Dad's message, my mind was a chaotic swirl of emotions: confusion, anger, sadness, and a small flicker of hope. I didn't know if I was ready to have a conversation with him, but part of me wanted answers. I typed back simply, "When can we talk?" He replied, "Tonight? I'll call you after dinner." I spent the evening pacing, replaying everything that had happened. How had things gotten so twisted? I kept thinking about the invitation Sarah had sent me, how Andrew had intercepted it, hid it away like some secret weapon. It was clear now that my entire family was conspiring against me. When my phone rang later that night, it was Dad. "Hey, Nathan." His voice was quiet, a little shaky. I wanted to explain, but it's complicated. "Explain what, Dad? Why you didn't want me at your retirement party? Why Andrew and Mom decided I was too much trouble?" I asked, holding back the frustration. There was a long pause on his end. "Look, I never wanted you to feel excluded. But your brother, he's always been the responsible one. He took care of Mom and me during the harder years. You, on the other hand, have been distant, always questioning decisions, always causing friction. We thought it would be easier without you there." I closed my eyes. "So instead of talking to me, you just decided to erase me? Like I don't exist? And Andrew's the one who decides who gets invited and who doesn't." "It's not like that," Dad insisted. "Your mother and I made the call. Andrew just helped. Helping by stealing my invitation? By lying to Aunt Lena and the rest of the family? By making me out to be the villain?" I asked, voice rising. Dad sighed heavily. "Nathan, family isn't always perfect. Sometimes you have to choose your battles. We wanted a peaceful night to honor me, not a confrontation. A peaceful night? You left out your own son for peace? That's not peace. That's betrayal, I said, the words stinging as I spoke them. I'm sorry you see it that way, Dad said softly. But things won't be the same anymore. That phrase hit me harder than anything. Things won't be the same. It was like he was already writing me off. We ended the call with an awkward goodbye. I didn't know if I was more upset at Dad or Andrew. The two of them had teamed up to push me out, and Mom hadn't lifted a finger to stop it. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about everything. I replayed all the moments when Andrew had subtly undermined me growing up, how Dad always praised Andrew's accomplishments and brushed mine aside, how Mom seemed to swoon over Andrew's perfect behavior but ignored my struggles. I dug into the past, calling Aunt Lena and a few other relatives who weren't caught up in the family drama. From what they told me, Andrew had always been the golden child, but in recent years, he had gotten worse. He was no longer just the favored son, he was actively sabotaging me, canceling events where I was supposed to be invited, spreading stories to make me look bad, and convincing Dad and Mom I was a disruptive influence. One relative even mentioned an incident from 2 years ago where Andrew had pressured Dad to cut off financial support for a project I was working on, something Dad reluctantly agreed to, believing Andrew's version of events. It was becoming clear Andrew had been working behind the scenes for a long time, and the retirement dinner exclusion was just the latest step. A few days later, I decided I needed proof. I called Sarah again. Can you send me everything you have? Invitations, messages, anything about the party, I asked. I'm already on it, she said. You won't believe what I found in Andrew's trash bin. Later that afternoon, Sarah texted me several photos. There were multiple envelopes, all addressed to me. Unopened, some marked with phrases like return to sender or do not deliver. Alongside those were screenshots of text messages between Andrew and Mom discussing who to exclude. One particularly chilling message had Mom telling Andrew, Nathan's presence will only cause more tension. Better to keep the family image clean. Reading those words made my chest tighten. Family image. It wasn't about me. It was about appearances. They had painted me as the villain, the black sheep, so they could keep up the perfect family facade in front of friends, colleagues, and the community. I confronted Andrew in person a few days later. I showed up unannounced at his office, hoping to get a reaction. He looked surprised but quickly masked it with a smug smile. Nathan, what a surprise. Didn't expect you to show up. I didn't waste time. Why did you do it? Why exclude me from Dad's retirement? Why lie to everyone? He shrugged, leaning back in his chair. Look, Dad's retirement was about him, not your drama. You've always been the one stirring things up. Mom and Dad agreed, and honestly, it was for the best. I shook my head. You don't get to decide who is family and who isn't. You just wanted to control the narrative, didn't you? Make yourself the golden son, the perfect kid. He laughed, cold and dismissive. Narrative? Maybe, but it works. And honestly, you've made it easy for us. I clenched my fists. You made it easy by lying, by keeping me out, by manipulating Dad. He shrugged again. You can't handle the truth, Nathan. Maybe it's better if you just stay out of our lives. I left his office that day feeling hollow, but I knew I wasn't done. If they wanted a war, I was ready to fight, just on my terms. Over the next week, I started reaching out to people who had witnessed Andrew's behavior over the years. Former family friends, co-workers, even some distant relatives. I collected stories, dates, and proof of Andrew's scheming. At the same time, I focused on my own life. My promotion celebration was coming up, and I wanted it to be a statement, not just a party, but a clear message that I wasn't invisible. Then, 2 days before the celebration, I got another message from Dad. This time, it wasn't just a text. It was a voicemail. His voice was shaky, almost desperate. Nathan, I don't know how to fix this, but I miss you. Please, at least hear me out. The invitation photo Sarah sent me earlier was still burned into my mind. The voicemail left me torn. Was Dad really sorry, or just guilty? Either way, the family I thought I had was fractured, and it was time to decide what to do next. After hearing Dad's voicemail, I sat alone in my apartment for a long time, weighing my options. Part of me wanted to pick up the phone and try to mend things. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that a simple apology wouldn't undo years of manipulation and exclusion. They had built a narrative painting me as the troublemaker, the ungrateful son, And that story had cost me my place in family events, milestones, and even my own father's affection. I realized then that if I wanted to reclaim my life, my dignity, I needed to do something bigger, not just for me, but to expose the truth for everyone who had been hurt by Andrew and the way he'd twisted the family dynamic. The first step was to gather undeniable proof. I reached out to Sarah again and asked her to keep digging. Meanwhile, I contacted some old friends and colleagues of Andrew's, the ones who had grown wary of his attitude and rumored behind-the-scenes tactics. Surprisingly, many of them were eager to share what they knew. One woman, Claire, had worked with Andrew at the engineering firm where Dad used to be. She told me Andrew had a habit of taking credit for projects that weren't his and undermining coworkers to climb the ladder faster. Another acquaintance mentioned that Andrew had been involved in questionable financial dealings connected to the family business, something Dad refused to see because of loyalty. I started compiling emails, text messages, and even some financial documents Claire managed to share discreetly. The picture was clearer than I wanted. Andrew wasn't just the favored son. He was actively poisoning the well around him to keep control. Meanwhile, I planned my promotion celebration carefully. It was going to be more than just a party. It was a statement. I rented a small venue, invited friends, co-workers, and some distant relatives who still remembered who I really was. I even reached out to a local journalist who covered family business stories, someone I trusted to handle the situation delicately but honestly. The day of the celebration, the venue was packed with genuine smiles and warm congratulations. It felt like a breath of fresh air after months of tension and silence. I made a short speech, thanking everyone for their support, and then subtly hinted at how sometimes family isn't just about blood, but about loyalty and respect. No one missed the underlying message. 2 days later, I decided it was time to take the next step. I compiled everything I had, the intercepted invitations, the text messages, the financial evidence, into a comprehensive dossier. I sent a copy to Dad via email, attaching a note. Dad, I'm sharing this not to hurt you, but so you see the full picture. Andrew has been manipulating you and Mom for years. I hope this helps you understand why I was excluded. I waited anxiously for a response. To my surprise, Dad replied quickly. Thank you for sharing this, Nathan. I was blind to a lot. Please, let's meet this weekend. That weekend, we met at a quiet coffee shop. Dad looked older than I remembered, tired and regretful. I never wanted it to come to this, he said quietly. Andrew convinced me he was protecting the family, but it was really about control. I'm sorry for not seeing it sooner. I nodded, holding back the flood of emotions. It's not just about apologies anymore, Dad. If we want to fix this, we have to confront Andrew together. He hesitated, but finally agreed. The next few days were a tense waiting game. I knew Andrew would fight back, maybe even harder now that he realized we were onto him. Then came the day of the family's annual reunion, a perfect stage for what I planned next. I arrived early with Dad and Sarah, dossier in hand. As relatives gathered, Andrew strolled in, confident as ever, wearing that smug grin like he owned the place. I waited until the moment was right, then stood up and addressed the crowd. I have something important to share, I began. For years, Andrew has manipulated not only Dad and Mom, but this entire family. I have proof of invitations I never received, messages where they admit to excluding me, and evidence of financial wrongdoing. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Andrew's face darkened, his eyes narrowing. Lies, he spat. This is just sour grapes from the kid who couldn't handle the spotlight. Let's hear the facts then, I said, and handed the dossier to my aunt. She started reading aloud excerpts, undeniable emails, texts, and documents. The room grew colder as relatives exchanged looks of shock and disbelief. Andrew's facade cracked. You're destroying our family, he shouted. No, I said calmly. I'm saving it. At that moment, Mom appeared, eyes wide but cold. Nathan, this is outrageous. You're tearing this family apart. I met her gaze steadily. Mom, this isn't about tearing us apart. It's about truth. And maybe it's time we all faced it. Andrew stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The family reunion ended in chaos, whispers and broken loyalties hanging thick in the air. That night, I got a text from Dad. Thank you for standing up. I'm proud of you. We'll figure this out together. For the first time in years, I felt hope. But I knew the fight was far from over. Andrew wouldn't back down easily, and I had no intention of letting him win. The fallout from the reunion was immediate and brutal, more intense than I had even anticipated. Andrew was furious, that much was obvious. But what surprised me was that he didn't back down or try to calm things. Instead, he doubled down, launching an all-out campaign to isolate me from the family and anyone remotely connected to them. Within days, I started receiving strange, unsettling messages from distant relatives I barely knew. These weren't the typical awkward, "sorry you're upset" texts. They were thinly veiled warnings, filled with phrases like, "for the sake of family peace, you should consider letting this go," or "sometimes it's better not to dig up the past." The tone was patronizing, borderline threatening. What made it even clearer was how uniform they sounded, as if Andrew had rallied a small network of loyalists to pressure me into silence. The weirdest part was that some of these people were distant cousins or family friends I had never spoken to much before. Suddenly, they were calling or texting, repeating the same lines, urging me to stop making waves. I could almost hear Andrew's voice behind their words, orchestrating the whole thing like a puppeteer. Meanwhile, Dad and I found ourselves in an uneasy rhythm of meeting almost daily. He wanted to fix things, I could see that much, but it was painfully clear that he was struggling. On one hand, he felt the undeniable truth I had brought to light, and on the other, he was caught in the web of his lifelong loyalty to Andrew, the son who had been the perfect one for so long. Dad's regret was genuine. I saw it in the way he avoided my eyes when he spoke, in the way he sighed deeply during our conversations. But his weakness was just as real. Sometimes, when Andrew's name came up, he'd falter, almost instinctively defending him or minimizing the evidence. "Andrew's not all bad," he'd say quietly. "He's just complicated." It was like watching a man torn between the facts and decades of denial, and it left me exhausted. Rebuilding a relationship with Dad wasn't going to be easy, and sometimes I wondered if it was even possible. Then there was Mom, an entirely different story. She was unyielding, almost stonewalling in her response. Where Dad showed cracks, Mom was a solid wall of denial and anger. She refused to admit any wrongdoing, going so far as to accuse me of betrayal and disrespect. Any attempt I made to talk to her was met with coldness, silence, or outright dismissal. She pulled away completely, cutting off almost all contact. Mom's allegiance to Andrew was total. She reinforced the family narrative that I was the black sheep, the troublemaker trying to tear the family apart. Watching her retreat so fully was painful, like losing a part of my identity I never thought I'd lose. But I knew then that some bridges were permanently burned. Andrew's retaliation didn't stop there. His tactics became more calculated and insidious. Quietly, he contacted my employer with twisted stories about my character and family instability, hoping to cast doubt on my professionalism and reliability. He painted me as a volatile and unreliable employee, dragging our family drama into my workplace. A few coworkers pulled away at first, uncertain what to believe, but thankfully most stood by me once the truth came out. Even so, fighting battles on so many fronts was draining, emotionally, mentally, and physically. It felt like a war with no clear end. On top of that, Andrew tried to rally support from family friends, business partners, and even community members, portraying himself as the victim of a jealous, vindictive younger brother who was trying to ruin a good man's reputation. But the evidence I had compiled was damning, and people started seeing through his carefully constructed lies and manipulations. It was clear Andrew was desperate to keep control, but his tactics only served to expose the lengths he was willing to go to maintain his image. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life piece by piece. I threw myself into work, channeling my frustration and energy into my career. Outside the family, I cultivated friendships and relationships that were genuine and supportive. People who valued me for who I was, not simply because I was the other son. Slowly but surely, I started creating new traditions, new milestones, and a new definition of family that didn't rely on their approval or validation. Dad and I kept in touch, but our relationship remained cautious and fragile. He was trying to be honest with himself and with me, but the years of blind loyalty to Andrew and the gaslighting had left scars too deep to fully heal overnight. Sometimes we spoke openly and honestly. Other times, conversations were strained and filled with unspoken tensions. There was hope, but it was tempered by reality. Mom and Andrew, They became shadows in my life. After repeated attempts to reconcile, each met with coldness, indifference, or outright hostility, I stopped reaching out. Their actions, more than words, made it clear they had chosen a side and were not willing to budge. I accepted that their version of family didn't include me anymore, and I stopped trying to force something that wasn't there. Looking back, I realize now that the family I grew up with was never the warm, supportive unit I once imagined. It was a carefully constructed performance, a fragile illusion maintained by lies, favoritism, and manipulation. Andrew was the director of this charade, casting me as the villain so he could play the hero, the perfect son, and the family's golden boy. The image they projected to the outside world was far from the truth behind closed doors. But I refused to let their toxic version of family define me. The pain of exclusion and betrayal shaped me, yes, but it also fueled my determination to live authentically and on my own terms. I learned that sometimes standing up for yourself means standing against those you once trusted most. So where are we now? Dad and I talk occasionally, carefully rebuilding some connection, but with clear boundaries and a mutual understanding that the past can't be erased but can be acknowledged. It's a cautious peace, not a full reconciliation, but it's progress. Mom and Andrew remain aligned, choosing to maintain their narrative and exclude me completely. They continue living in their world where I'm the villain, and I no longer expect anything different from them. I've built a life surrounded by friends and chosen family who appreciate me for who I am, not because of family ties or favoritism. Most importantly, I'm no longer the ungrateful son who ruined the party. I'm someone who stood up for himself against a family that tried to erase him and won. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this.